Thank you very much, Omar, for a very clear and broad presentation. So let me first of all see if there are any questions that you would like to ask from the floor. Two mics here. Who would like to, there's one question there. Let me just see some fingers and some hands. Any other? There's one in the back there. Okay, so those three questions. There in the back.
Hi, my name is Sonja Zilman. I'm of the Dutch Palestine Committee. I'd like to thank you for your very valuable contributions. I have a question. It's about the Israeli Apartheid Week, which is coming on. And I have a question for Ina and maybe for Omar as well, because we were made to understand that a university in Paris has withdrawn its support for organizing a week on Israeli apartheid. How would you qualify this?
Thank you, Sonia, for that question. Maybe the gentleman here? Just to hold the mic. Yeah.
I'm Heidi Meijer. I want to make things a bit worse. There's a famous corporation of Barenboim, in which is this orchestra where Palestinian subhumans are allowed to handle a valuable violin. And I don't doubt that he means well, but he doesn't know anything about how a government like the Israeli criminal government works. And I know because I've lived under occupation in Holland, and I know how it works. And they misuse that and say, in order to say, you see, we are so good, we even let these apes let handle the violin. And I wonder what you think about it.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. In the back, there was a question there. Yeah, notice. No, after. Thank you.
Yeah, I have a short question. My name is Elika Siani from Gate 48, and I'm also an academic. And I was wondering if you could tell us a bit more about the academic boycott. Can you describe a few examples? Because you gave examples from the other forms of boycott. I was really curious to see your opinion. How do you see that coming out in practice?
Thank you. And there are two questions here in front. Yes. No, it's fine.
Mr. Omar Barghouti, please, take hand. I'm Dr. Moin Al-Bosh.
I think you need to speak for a moment. Thanks.
I want to see something very important. I am Dr. Al-Bosh Moin. I'm Dr. Moin Al-Bosh from Gaza City. And Mr. Omar Barghouti from Ramallah City. We are friends, but from more time, I will to meet Omar Al-Barghouti in our country. I will thank you very much to allow me to see Omar Al-Barghouti in country, in Holland country. Thank you very much for what? Because the Israeli occupation not allowed to meet Omar Al-Barghouti in our country. It's border, big the border in all country. Not Berlin border, but Israeli border between Gaza and the West Bank. Thank you very much.
Would you like to?
My name is Salah Gishta from Michaeli. It's our pleasure to see Dr. Omar Barghouti, which really considered a great opportunity to see her in the Netherlands. After, I think, we have this engagement between the West Bank and Gaza Strip, which is very hard for all the new generation. And really, we are not non-political parties, but we are representative of the Nama College with Dr. Moin Al-Bosh. And the problem that you take your attention for the political parties, and we try to make freedom for all the people in Palestine and Israel. But the problem that from the actual assessment of the Gasser, you have pay your attention for the academic sector, which is very important, from churches and all the CBOs and NGOs in the Netherlands. And really, we would like to support you in terms of the sector of youth, female and email. We would like to adopt a new vision. I would like to be those youth more integrated into the societies of the international community. Besides, we'd like to say something is very important. If you would like to, our Palestinian people in Gaza, our youth in the West Bank be more oriented, you have to pay your attention to make common sense regarding finding, for example, more funding for those people to be more oriented and to be more integrated under the umbrella of the international community. This is our sense, and we have to hear us that we are in need your support in this regard. And for that reason, we'd like to make mutual cooperation with the CBOs and NGOs of the Netherlands, besides other Europe countries, to be more oriented. Thanks a lot for your attention.
Thank you very much for those questions. I think the right side, or well, maybe from your side, the left side has done very well. We will go to that side in the next round. I think the questions were actually very clustered, very much on both. I will ask both of you to answer. Question on the academic boycotts, the question about Paris withdrawing from. University of Paris withdrawing from Israel Apartheid Week, and also the question there for support, but you have also been saying, well, it's also your own self-interest that should inform you. So the floor first to you and then to Ina, or first to Ina? Ina first?
Yeah, I think I could, yeah. Okay. Regarding the event that was cancelled in Paris 8, in the University of Paris 8, I think maybe Omar could actually tell more about it. But yeah, I mean, the question was, yes, what we think about it. I find it very frightening. I can tell you that just 3 days ago, we in the Coalition of Women for Peace received an email from a reporter of a students' magazine asking us about a woman who was affiliated with the Coalition of Women for Peace, and asking about her academic and political involvement. And you could see from the questions that it's going to be a very biased article trying to sort of frighten Israeli academics that support the BDS. And creating this atmosphere of fear is, I mean, when you are threatening the basic livelihood of academics simply for their legitimate political positions, is, as I say, it's frightening. And when it also happens in France, for example, when you cannot have those debates, well, I think it's actually a question that I would, ask the French public. What would they hold of this?
Okay, to continue on that, I never thought much of Western democracy, but it's getting worse. It's really getting worse. I mean, I studied in the West, I studied in New York, and it used to be better than that. Okay, it always had its flaws, but there's a total disconnect between Western governments and Western publics on certain issues, and not just Palestine, on social, economic issues, environmental issues, and so on. What the majority of the people think is not necessarily reflected in government. And we're seeing this across the Western world. So in a country like France, when a university shuts down debate because it's too polemical, they did use that term. Imagine a university saying, we're shutting down an event because it's too polemical. Why do you have a university to start with if you can't allow polemical discussions? And they said because it's too polemical, it might disrupt public order. So if students ask difficult questions, is that a disruption of public order? So it's clearly the exceptionalism, the pedestal that Desmond Tutu talked about. Israel is put on a pedestal, and thou shalt not dissent from the mainstream views that support Israel. You cannot criticize Israel increasingly in the mainstream. When it comes to universities shutting down debate, this is serious. This is really dangerous. It undermines the very concept of democracy in the West and academic freedom, of course. And the reason, one of the reasons they used the lobby, Israel's lobby in France, which is the second largest lobby in the world after the US, is because I am participating in that event with a video. I sent them a video because I couldn't be with them. And they used that as a reason why this event should naturally be shut down, because they're showing a video of mine. Regarding Harry Meyer's question on Berenbaum, it's a difficult question simply because it's not a top priority for us. But the concept is true that the orchestra that Berenbaum leads is a form of what we call in Arabic, the English term for it is normalization. Normalization means making something abnormal look normal. And bringing Palestinians and Israelis hugging and playing music together, or women from both sides talking about feminist issues, but let's not discuss the occupation because you don't want to spoil the party here. I mean, we're discussing macho sexism and let's not get into politics, occupation and all that nonsense. All this is a form of normalization, making something abnormal. The relationship between the oppressor and the oppressed is abnormal. The only way to end it is to end oppression. And then people can have normal relations. Women and women, youth and youth, workers and workers, everyone, musicians can have normal relations. So long as oppression obtains, so long as it persists, you cannot have a normal relationship between oppressor and oppressed, except in resisting oppression. A Palestinian youth, one of the youth leaders called Ma'ad Musleh, coined a very nice term, which I always like to quote. He said, in a situation of oppression, what the oppressors and the oppressed can do is co-resistance, not coexistence. They need to co-resist, like Ina and I are doing here. We're not discussing the weather. It would be normalization. We're working together towards human rights. Not BDS, but human rights. We don't do BDS. And that's co-resistance. When Berenbaum's orchestra played in Ramallah a couple of years ago, one Israeli violinist went after a few days, gave an interview to an Israeli paper, and said it's so wonderful. A few days ago I was playing the violin, holding the violin in the middle of Ramallah, and today I'm holding my M16 at the checkpoint. He's a reserve soldier. And I can go from one to the other without a problem. Without a sense of irony. I mean, he did not know what he was saying, but he said it so normally. That's normalization. About academic boycott. Academic and cultural boycott was the first part of BDS that was launched in 2004. And many people thought, are the Palestinians crazy? I mean, are they just totally irrational? They start with calling for a boycott of the academy in Israel, that their natural ally, because academics are usually the more progressive and so on and so forth. Especially in Israel, the academics are supposedly very pro-peace and against the occupation. So have the Palestinians gone crazy? No, we haven't. We're still rational, we have semi-average intelligence, and so on. We call for an academic and cultural boycott because the academy in Israel is one of the main pillars of the system of oppression. I know in every country the academy plays a role. It's complicit in weapons industries and so on. But in Israel, it's well beyond that. According to Israeli researchers, it's a very fundamental pillar of the system of oppression. The Israeli academy is responsible for playing a major part in planning, implementing, justifying, and whitewashing Israeli violations of international law. In every step of the way, from planning the wall, to planning colonies, to planning ethnic cleansing, planning, not just whitewashing after the fact. The Israeli academy has played a key role, a major role. I'll just give a couple of examples for the sake of time. Tel Aviv University was directly responsible in developing the so-called doctrine of disproportionate force. That's what they call it. It's not an euphemism. They call it the doctrine of disproportionate force, which was used in Gaza. And that doctrine says that since you cannot effectively, as a big army, Israel is the 5th largest army in the world, but it cannot effectively destroy irregular resistance. As the Palestinians, it can destroy armies, tanks, airplanes, but it cannot easily destroy irregular resistance. The most effective way to crush Palestinian resistance is to destroy Palestinian infrastructure and make Palestinian civilians pay such a heavy price that they will do Israel's bidding by proxy and force the resistance to stop. So they would pressure their own resistance and make it stop. This very vicious doctrine that violates, this is calling for crimes against humanity, basically, collective punishment against the Palestinians. This was developed at Tel Aviv University through a series of workshops with the military industry, with government, with the army. But mainly Israeli academics developed it at Tel Aviv University. Hebrew University, the most important and prestigious in Israel, itself has one of its 2 campuses built largely on occupied territory in East Jerusalem. And now some might say, oh, but Hebrew University started since 1920-something, before Israel was created, and it had a building in what's now occupied East Jerusalem. Yes, but that doesn't give Israel the right to move its academics and students to live and work in occupied territory. That's a direct violation of the Fourth Geneva Convention. It's a war crime. But Hebrew University commits that crime. So it's not complicit. It itself is committing a war crime by moving Israeli academics and students to live in the occupied territory and work and so on. And of course it has an army base. You don't have many universities around the world that have army bases, but Hebrew University does. Has a real army base on one of its campuses. And I can go on and on and on. Ariel University or College is built on occupied territory near Nablus, near Safed. What we're calling for specifically is to boycott Israeli academic institutions, not academics. We make a very clear distinction. In South Africa, the academic cultural boycott was a blanket boycott against everyone and everything South African. In the Palestinian boycott, we make a distinction. We don't call for boycotting individuals, we're boycotting institutions. Do not speak at institutions, do not have any institutional links with Israeli universities, and so on and so on. Refuse to grade papers for them, refuse to referee, and so on. Any institutional link is rejected. An Israeli academic coming to the Netherlands to teach at the University of Amsterdam, there's no problem to participate in a conference that doesn't violate our guidelines, because he or she is affiliated with the university, but not representing that university. Now, if the president or some official of the university is coming, then he or she is coming on an official basis. That should be boycotted. So we make a clear distinction between institutional boycott and individual boycott. We don't adopt individual boycott. But why don't we, is the question in South Africa. They did. Why are Palestinians so nice? We're not. It's not about nice. It's about being practical. And it's about also a principle. We refuse to boycott individuals because we would become McCarthyist. We would have a blacklist who's a good Israeli academic and who's a bad Israeli academic. We're not in that business. We don't do political testing. We refuse to do political testing on principle, on moral grounds. But the reality is, it's not because Israeli academics are at the forefront of fighting the occupation. They're just as bad as the average Israeli. Absolutely, there's no difference that we've seen between academics and the rest of society. The entire Israeli society has shifted to the far, far right, and so did Israeli academics. We're not seeing absolutely any difference. So when statistics tell us that 94% of Jewish Israelis supported the war on Gaza, even after knowing that civilian casualties, out of that 94%, there were many, many academics. To be more precise, in 2008, 4 Jewish Israeli academics had a petition that calls on the Israeli military authorities to allow Palestinian academics and students passage at checkpoints without too much trouble. They did not call them occupied territories, lest they offend. They just said in the territories, a euphemism used in Israel. So just allow them passage at checkpoints. Basic academic freedom, academics and students. And they sent their petition to all 9,000 Israeli academics, thinking that, any decent academic would sign this. This is not calling for ending the occupation even. Just allowing your fellow academics to pass at checkpoints. Of the 9,000 academics, 407 only signed. 4.5% of the Israeli academy saw it fit to sign such a basic academic freedom petition. So this gives you an idea where the Israeli Academy is. Despite that, we insist on boycotting the institutions, not the individuals. Sorry, it was a long answer, but I have to give the whole context. Or you're
Hi, I'm Mickey, and I just had a question on a term you mentioned, the term Renaissance. I'm very interested in the choice you make for this particular term, because to me it's a very Western hegemonic term. So could you elaborate on that, please?
Okay. Western hegemonic term. No, it's a term, French term, English term now. What I meant to say is that the so-called Arab Spring, those Arab popular revolutions, are facing a lot of challenges, obviously. It's not a straight line. There are many, many, many problems along the way. No one can guarantee the results. But the most important thing that will not be reversed is that after decades of complete silence, complete lack of social, economic upheavals and political upheavals in this Arab region, now, finally, critical mass was reached among the public, and they were able to take it forward and change governments. And finally push for democratic rights, for equal rights, for some form of justice and democracy. This is not less than a renaissance, a beginning of a renaissance, what I call, in the Arab region. After so many decades of complete lack of democracy, thanks mainly to Western complicity. I mean, it did not happen in a vacuum. Racist journalists like Thomas Friedman used to say, oh, democracy will happen in the Arab world when camels fly. He had an article called When Camels Fly. So, totally racist. So it's as if genetically we're unable to have upheavals. You know, we're retarded. We can't reject injustice. It's part of our genetic order. But now that we've had all these upheavals, clearly, despite Western complicity, especially US, British, and French complicity in maintaining dictatorships in the Arab world, the masses were able to remove those dictatorships in some Arab countries. And this may well usher in a new era for the entire Arab region. And when I call it Arab Renaissance or Arab Spring, I'm not using it in ethnic terms. I'm saying the Arab region because it has many ethnicities. Armenians and Kurds and Amazigians and others, many ethnic groups in the Arab world. It's not just Arabs. So it's a renaissance for the Arab region, for all its components, not just for the ethnic group. That's why I meant it.
Thank you, Omar. There's a question there.
Mr. Barghouti, my name is Omar Barghouti. I'm the chairman of an organization called Different Jewish Voice, and I have a question. Could you please define conditions under which BDS is deemed no longer necessary?
When the three rights are met, when the three basic conditions, when the occupation ends, when apartheid is dismantled, and when the refugees are allowed the right to return. Now, some people might say, and we heard that, we hear it quite often in the newspapers and in the media, that basically what you're doing is delegitimizing Israel itself, not just the occupation. So by insisting on the right of return, by insisting on equality, in fact, a very fanatic right-wing rabbi at Manchester University a few years ago, and I'm saying this story quite a lot, but I will repeat it here, told me, you have three basic rights. One, ending the occupation, I can live with. Right of return, I'm against, but I understand it. It's that second right. It's full equality in Israel. That's code for destroying Israel. Why don't you just come out and say it? Be honest and say this is code for destroying Israel. So I said, let me deconstruct what you just said. Equality and justice would destroy Israel. What does that say about Israel? Yeah. If equality destroys any system, what does that say about that system? And why is it only in Israel's case that trying to change a system that's so clearly unjust to a system that's much more just and egalitarian is deemed destructive, destroying, as if it's a bloody war? It's a non-violent movement, for God's sake. We are not destroying anything except apartheid. and inequality and injustice. That's what we're destroying. We're not destroying people, we're not destroying a nation, we're destroying a system of injustice. And I wouldn't even use the term destroying. We're transforming this very unjust system towards freedom, justice, and equality. So I think that's the key point. Ending occupation, ending apartheid in Israel, and the right of return. And this is not biased towards a one-state or two-state agenda, because this is connected to it. Theoretically, even under a two-state solution, theoretically, you should be able to observe those three basic rights. The fact that you have two states does not give Israel the right to be an apartheid state. So in a two-state solution or a five-state solution, none of the states has a right to be an apartheid state. You still have to observe international law, even under a two-state system. Refugees have a right to go back regardless who's governing that land. Call it Israel, call it Palestine, we don't care. Refugees have a right to go home. Equality is a very basic fundamental right in international law. There's no way you'll get off the hook just in a two-state solution. So that's theoretically, you should be able to observe those three rights. And then that will be the end of BDS. We hope. And then no one goes to jail for advocating BDS.
He also wants to speak, I think, and then you first.
My name is Marga van Hoek. I'm not a specialist in this field. I'm an urban developer, so I try to build up cities. But I'm very inspired by both your presentations. One question I have regards the religious component, because I haven't heard you say anything about that aspect. And I think, from what I know, that is a big part of the discussion and the big basis of why people say they're right or they're wrong. And related to that is also the question, of course, in your situation, you have a discussion about oppressed and the people oppressing. While in other countries, Muslim countries, it's the other way around. The Christian societies are oppressed. So in a world of equality and in your ideal state, is there a guarantee that when you reach equality, the balance will not tip the other way around? And might that not be the argument that the Israelis have now for saying, well, we cannot ever go to that situation because we will be the oppressed?
Did you also want to add something else?
Yeah. I want to make a tiny critical remark to my friend Omar, because I think he was not completely consistent. He pointed out the completely important element in the whole planning of oppression, occupation, which the universities play. And that means, so the whole thing is planned, researched in the university. And as you know, the University of Haifa has devoted a tower on its area to the heroes, the mass murder heroes of in Gaza. So that are the Israeli universities, and if I would say you should boycott any Israeli academic who does not publicly say I'm against the occupation because that's a criminal act. That's my point of view as a member of the anti-Jewish, anti-Zionist network.
Any other questions?
I'm Rob Groenhuizen, one of the board members of NIPI, one of the organizers. We talked about Israel, and I want to question, is it not that it belongs to the West? Because Israel is a settlers colony, and England made a lot of settlers colonies. So we can think here, I don't say we do, but we can think that it's only Israel and not the West who is working on Palestine. And I have a second question. Is there not, let's say, a red line? The more violence Israel is using is also a sign that it is losing, and not a sign that it becomes stronger.
Thank you. Maybe I'll first pass the question the question to Ina. And maybe Ina, it's also interesting if you would like to elaborate a little bit how you came through your discovery. We're talking here a lot about the academic complicity. Well, you grew up in Israel, so how did you learn about the occupation?
Yes, I was actually also tempted to share some of my experiences from the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. And I think one point that we didn't mention, because, well, really there are so many forms of complicity of the universities, of the Israeli universities in the occupation, and one of them is the oppression and discrimination and just simply political persecution and academic persecution of Palestinian students in the Israeli universities and also of political activists. I would actually give one example of a conference, and I hope I will be able to recall its name. The name is quite long, so please be patient. It goes like this, and it was a conference organized by the Hebrew University of Jerusalem in presence of all the major figures, the president of the university, Aaron Barak, the former president of the Supreme Court, and all the elite of the Israeli justice system. And the name of the conference went like this. Democracy fights terrorism with one hand tied behind its back. When, why, and how must this hand be untied? So we basically had the university hosting a conference about how to legitimize torture and various forms of collective punishment, and how to legitimize that. I was there with several students, and we ended, that was while I was a student at the university, and we all ended on internal trial in the not very democratic system of internal trials in the university, in which we cannot have legal representation, but we are tried by three important professors. And this was when I could see how the justice system works, and even though we had really brilliant legal arguments to defend our protest against the conference, it really didn't help us. And yeah, we were sentenced, nothing serious in the internal university. Yeah, it's very, but still enough to make the experience of being a student in this university and being politically active as something very unpleasant. And there are various sanctions in place. Yeah, and also in short, I mean, yes, I grew up in the Israeli education system since the age of 9 in Haifa, the city that you just mentioned, a mixed Jewish-Arab city. It took me about 10 years of living in Haifa to actually understand that it was an Arab city, to understand that Arabs didn't come from Jordan the way I came from Russia. They were actually there before. Those are very basic information that I simply didn't possess from the Israeli education system, and I think it's one of the reasons why. Yeah, I think it's one of the things that BDS does. I think it brings the issue of the occupation and apartheid and violation of human rights of Palestinians, and the fact that there are Palestinians, it brings us to the Israeli public discourse. And I think for me, the major oppression as a young Israeli woman was not, would not be the fact that someone doesn't come to perform in Israel, as much as it was not really understanding the social and political reality in which I live, of understanding where I am and what is happening around me. And also, I just wanted to comment on the religious element, because so it happened that when my family came to Israel, I was sent to a religious school, even though my parents were completely not religious, but the nice people at the Ministry of Absorption recommended them to help me become a good Jewish Israeli. I think, I mean, there are some, I'm not sure exactly what part of religious, there are so many religious aspects here, I mean, both to the political situation, but also to ways to handle this, and also to political resistance. I mean, one of the most courageous and persistent and inspiring organizations working for justice, Israeli organizations, are Rabbis for Human Rights. So you have many ways, and also I think the Christian organizations that were mentioned have a very important role. And at the same time, of course, we have this ethno-religious and ethnic base for nationality in a way that makes citizenship a theoretical construct rather than an actual right that people can exercise regardless of their religion and ethnicity, which is, of course, very unfortunate.
So, to start from the religious aspect, I was concerned with your use of the term, can you guarantee? Humans are entitled to human rights inherently. It's unconditional. Every human being is entitled to human rights unconditionally. We don't have to guarantee anything to anyone to be entitled to our human rights. When people fought against slavery in the US, they did not refer to the many African countries that had a very terrible system of oppression, black oppression against blacks, black presidents oppressing black majorities. So we didn't say that the blacks in the US will have to guarantee to the whites that they won't be as nasty as some of those Idi Amin or some dictator in Africa before we end slavery. Or we didn't say to South African blacks, to bring it closer to home, oh, we don't want you to be the majority and rule, because otherwise we'll be like those nasty African countries led by dictators. It would have been ridiculous to say that then. It's the same here. People are entitled to rights, period, regardless. Now, as human rights activists, we have to be very consistent. When we fight injustice at home, we also fight injustice everywhere else. We've got to be very consistent as human rights activists. So when we see human rights violations, international violations being committed in Sudan, we don't protect the Sudanese government and say, because they're Arab and Muslim, we shall not speak against them. We speak against every oppression, everywhere. So somebody might say, but what about Saudi Arabia? I always get this question. I say, what about Saudi Arabia? Start a petition calling for a boycott of Saudi Arabia, I'll be the first to sign it. Are you kidding me? I mean, it's one of the worst abusers of human rights around the world. So we don't protect abuse of human rights anywhere, and we don't condone abuse of human rights anywhere. We are fully for equal rights for every human being, regardless of ethnicity, religion, and any other identity attribute. Rights should not be based on identity. That's the key. In international law, in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, humans should deserve equal rights, regardless. If we all uphold this notion, this principle, then there is no room for discrimination based on identity in the allocation of rights. I guess that's the key point. The West's responsibility, I hope I did not ignore that. I thought I did speak a bit about the West's responsibility for the entire colonial conflict that we're facing today, and this is why we're focusing a lot of our BDS efforts in the West, because Western complicity is the number one reason why Israel's system of oppression has persisted as long as it has. Israel cannot continue its occupation and apartheid without Western complicity. So it's not a luxury for us to do BDS in the Netherlands, France, Britain, and the US and Canada and so on. It's the very battlefield where things will be decided. The Western complicity is what keeps the system going, so we're very keen on that. In Britain, I use much harsher terms because they have a little closer relationship to this whole oppressive system. Going back to the highest view on university professors and so on, I think you're talking about maybe professors who have a special role in committing crimes. And that's different, because then you don't need the PACBI guidelines, the Palestinian Campaign for the Academic Culture Boycott. You use common sense guidelines. If any person, Israeli, American, Palestinian, or otherwise, is involved in the commission of war crimes, he or she should be held accountable as an individual, of course. They should be held accountable as criminals, regardless of their national identity. It's irrelevant. And this should apply to Israelis as well. So when an Israeli academic who had justified the massacre in Gaza goes to Harvard University, and this is not hypothetical, this is true, to teach how to untie that hand to Harvard law students, she should be held accountable, arrested, and go to court, because she's a war criminal. She was responsible for passing laws that allowed the massacre in Gaza. So definitely, but that's different, because we're not saying that academic boycott applies to institutions. That means every single academic in Israel is off the hook. Of course not. Of course not. Those who are criminally implicated should face the consequences, legal consequences, through courts. But I don't think boycott would be necessarily the most effective or the most right means to use against them, in my opinion.